There we go. Okay, I finally figured out the audio and video and all of that. So, as promised, I do have an instructional video today over the Black Death. I do want to talk about some final assignments with you as well. So, let's go ahead and go to Schoology, go to our course, and look over the expectations before I do go over those slides for the Black Death. For some reason, the folder for 1214 is up here rather than down here. I don't know. It's an orange folder this week. So if we click on the agenda, we are finishing up. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the Renaissance. We ran out of time. But that is something that I would highly recommend that you look through on your own. So today I'm going to give you that YouTube instructional video, which is this. Tomorrow you do have a Kahoot challenge over the Black Death, just some of the material that we've gone over so far with the disease crash course, the slides that I'm about to go through with you today. So that will be a review. Wednesday, you'll have a mandatory Zoom with me. I would like to just see how you're doing, if you've got any questions before the end of our semester together. And then I need to drop in your final assignment, which is just going to be a short written assignment about what you've learned in the course, what was most interesting to you, etc. So be on the lookout for that final assignment. Hopefully I'll have it posted either today or tomorrow. Okay, so let's go over our last bit of information, and that is the Black Death. Hold on 1 second. Yep. Okay, I apologize for that. The dogs were going nuts. I'm still at home. I thought I had the PowerPoint slides up, but I do not. So just give me 2 seconds to upload those so that you can follow along or go back and review. We'll go over those slides together, and this will be your last instructional, technically, day of material. The rest is just going to be review and then a final assignment. So maybe it will download. Download. Okay. That's probably why I couldn't find it. I was looking under B for Black Death, and it's the Black Death. So hold on a second. Okay, it's gonna be right. Oh, it's got an underscore in it. Goodness gracious. Hey, there we go. Thank you for your patience. Okay, here's the material. It's now in the Black Death folder. You did your disease crash course. You should have done the TED Ed video that goes over the Black Death and bubonic plague and how it's kind of continued on throughout history, how there's been different waves of it and how it still exists today. So if you haven't done that, make sure that you do that as well. All right, so the Black Death or bubonic plague. So originally the Black Death came from Asia. There were several different waves, but originally the bubonic plague, this outbreak happened in the 1330s. Okay, so originally the bubonic plague affected rodents, rats, particularly from fleas that were infecting the rats. But it will spread to humans as well. A couple of different reasons for that. When people were trading and traveling on ships, there would be mice. That's how people got exposed. But poor sanitation was truly a trigger for the outbreak of the bubonic plague as well. So the reason why it's called the bubonic plague is because one of the forms of this plague created what's called a buboes. These were sore spots that were found on your lymph nodes, under your armpits, your groin area as well. But I call this unit the Black Death because there are actually 3 different forms of this plague that broke out during the time frame. And not only is it the bubonic, but pneumonic and septicemic. So each of these different forms had different rates of mortality or death rates, symptoms, etc. So bubonic being the most popular form, as you can see in this picture here, that swelling of a buboes, kind of like a bruising. The mortality rate of that was about 30 to 75%. And that just depended on a couple of different things. One, it could depend on your age range. It could depend on the severity of those buboes. So that's why that mortality rate is so wide scale, I guess, in terms of range. But again, your symptoms, there were inflammation of these buboes, and then that would kind of, swell up and then attack your blood system. So that is the most famous type. But we also have what's called pneumonic. So when you think pneumonic, think lungs. So the mortality rate is a lot higher in this type of Black Death. At least in that time period, it was 90 to 95%. But if you get pneumonic plague, because of our high technology and medicine, you can actually survive these types of plagues today. So if treated today, it's only a 5 to 10% mortality rate. But it is the infection of your lungs. It creates an abundance of fluid within your lungs. And a lot of times, people were like drowning from the inflammation and buildup and congestion throughout their lungs. So oftentimes the symptoms would be that your snot was tinted with blood, or you could choke on your own blood as well. Not pleasant. Last but not least, probably the grossest one, I think, is the septicemic. This is the rarest form of the Black Death, but the mortality rate was very, very high. There's still not a treatment for it. So if you've ever heard of the term going septic, this is the infection of your blood. So people would get very high fevers. Their skin would turn different colors like black and purple. And then usually victims would die the same day. So people were literally dropping like flies. And so this will cause legitimate fear for a lot of Asians and Europeans throughout this time frame. So by October 1347, Italian merchants were coming from the Black Sea, docking in Italy, and were spreading the disease, okay? Unknowingly, they were spreading a disease. So over time, more and more people will die. And what's really interesting, usually I show a documentary on this, but even in this time frame, people were learning that quarantining was one of the best ways to protect themselves from this disease. So here's one account of the devastation. So realizing what a deadly disaster had come to them, people drove the Italians from their cities. So people were shutting down their cities, not allowing others to come into these towns. But disease remained because people were already sick. Death was found everywhere. Fathers abandoned their sick sons. Lawyers refused to come out to make wills for the dying. Friars and nuns were left to take care of the sick. That is their sense of responsibility at this time. Monastery and converts were too deserted, as well as the stricken. Bodies were left in empty houses, and nobody was giving proper Christian burials. And if you remember anything about the Christian church or the Catholic church, having your priests or pastors or, even your bishops to come out and properly bury the dead, that's really important, right? But people were literally left for dead. And so many people were dying at such a high rate that there were some villages and towns that would just come pick up all the bodies of the dead and put them into a pit, and they were not formally or properly buried. So as you can see, there's different waves and movements of the plague. So you see the Black Sea in 1347, but then it spreads elsewhere as years continued. So estimated deaths, because not all deaths were recorded or documented, but a total number of deaths worldwide from this pandemic, which is different than an epidemic, so pandemic being a worldwide disease, is that it estimated to be about 75 million people were killed, and an estimate of 20 to 30 million deaths in Europe. So there's numbers ranging from 1/3 to 2/3 of all of Europe's population was wiped out. Okay. And another scary part about this for people, again, this is a time where people were very superstitious and they didn't have the medicine and technology to truly understand like what was causing this and what was, creating the spread and why people were dying. And so a scary part for a lot of people was even those priests that came in to heal the sick were getting sick as well. So some of the godliest people on earth were getting sick. And so people had a legitimate fear that God was angry with them. So people would write about it. One of the most interesting writers of the time, his name was Boccaccio. He used humor and satire to write about the plague. So he said, I ate lunch with friends, but then by dinner I was eating, or they were eating with their ancestors in paradise. So you would have lunch with people on earth, and then by dinner they were gone. In the winter, the disease seemed to disappear, but only because fleas were dormant then. And within a 5-year time frame, we have about 25 million people dead, making it 1/3 of Europe's population. And then if you watch that TED Ed video, it also talks about like how originally, obviously it wasn't good that a lot of people died, but then it opened up, the economy more, and people were able to feed their families more, and so forth. So it's weird, like it's super unfortunate that so many people died, but then like the way that Europe was kind of shaped from that is very interesting. So some early theories, because people didn't know why they were spread. Unfortunately, the Jewish population throughout all of world history has been persecuted and scapegoated for a lot of different events. And interestingly enough, one of the common rumors that was going around during this time frame was that the Jews within local communities were poisoning wells. Okay. Here is an article that you can look up on your own if you'd like, of a more modern outbreak of the bubonic plague in the United States. So it still exists. It's just very, very, very rare and oftentimes treatable. The oriental rat flea. So fleas' mouths have two functions. They squirt saliva and partly digested blood into a bite, and then they also suck up blood from the host. So it created a pattern. So the fleas would drink rat blood that carried the bacteria. Bacteria would multiply within the flea's gut. The gut would clog with that bacteria, then bite a human. Human is then infected. Okay. So I wanted to go over this with you just because it goes over the causes of the Black Death, the different types of Black Death, and then kind of discusses, kind of the overall general consensus of how people felt about the Black Death. So I think, and I've mentioned this before, but I think it's really interesting to talk about this topic as we are quarantined right now with our own pandemic. But what is so interesting about world history is there are patterns that can be found, right? So even in the 1300s, the way that people tried to combat this pandemic is similar to our 2020 pandemic. So hopefully you learned something from this, and please let me know if you have any questions for the week. Thank you so much for everything that you've done and continue to do, and hopefully you've enjoyed the class. All right, have a great day.